Welcome to Inner Fortitude with ECs. I'm your host, EC Spurn, and I want to thank you for joining me on today's topic, emotional intelligence. So what is emotional intelligence? It is basically the skill that allows you the ability to identify, understand, and process your own emotions, the ability to identify and understand the emotions of others, and also understand how your own emotions impact the people around you. Now, the good news is that this is not something that you are necessarily born with. This is actually something that you can develop yourself with practice. Now, this is a fairly new concept. It was actually conceptualized in 1990 by two social psychologists by the name of John Mayer and John Salivoy. Many experts now believe that your EQ, or your emotional quotient, is actually a more important factor in indicating success and happiness than IQ, which is your intelligence quotient. Now, if that sounds kind of crazy to you, tune in, because there's just so much more to learn about emotional intelligence and why in the world it would be so much more important a factor in indicating success and happiness in your life. Emotional intelligence was popularized by Daniel Goleman. In his book titled Emotional Intelligence, he talks about 5 key elements in EI. The first one is self-awareness. The second one is self-management. The third one is motivation. The fourth one is empathy. And the last one is social skills. And so in order to develop your EQ, or your emotional intelligence, you would have to sort of master these 5 key elements. I've already shared the self-awareness tips and techniques in order to develop that, but I am also going to be producing the remaining 4, and so stay tuned for that. Make sure that you subscribe to my channel so that you can follow through and follow up with those techniques as well. But let's dive a little deeper into emotional intelligence and what that even looks like. So now we know what it is. We know that it's kind of the ability to identify, process, understand one's own emotions, and the ability to identify other people's emotions, and also how my emotions impact the rest of the world. But you also will need to understand how that actually manifests itself in a person. What does a person with low emotional intelligence look like? Well, this is a person that is more likely to take things personally when you're trying to offer them constructive criticism. They are easily offended. They hold grudges. They have a hard time coping with changes in their lives. They don't know how to cope with unpleasant emotions like sadness or anger or fear. They tend to react to those emotions rather than taking a minute to understand it and respond effectively. They neglect their own needs. They allow toxicity in their lives, toxic relationships, toxic situations. All of these things kind of lead to them struggling a little bit in these relationships. They struggle to make things work. And so on the flip side, what does a person with, a high EQ look like? And when I'm talking about high emotional intelligence, I think that it's probably better if I talk about it in terms of areas of their lives, because it manifests itself in the person, and there are things that will actually make you a better partner and a better friend, a better parent, a better boss, a better employee. There is a reason why large companies are actually investing money into training their staff in order to develop their emotional intelligence, because highly emotionally intelligent people are actually better performers. They are more motivated. They are more efficient. And so how does that look like in a career? In a career, they are better team players. They are better able to cope and deal with change in a constructive way. They don't hold back their emotions, but what they do is they communicate effectively in finding those solutions. They will accept others' thoughts and opinions because they realize that other people's opinions and thoughts matter too. They're also very likely to accept constructive criticism and learn from them because they see them as opportunities for growth. They are also very much so motivated to succeed. They are self-driven. They don't need someone else to tell them to do something. They move forward because they are more likely to, again, learn from new experiences and want to put that to the test. They want to become better people. And lastly, they listen really well, which makes them really good team players and good leaders. And while we're on the topic of leaders, what does a boss that is highly emotionally intelligent look like? A boss that is emotionally intelligent shows optimism. So in light of challenges or setbacks or failures within the work environment, they know how to turn those negative situations into an opportunity for growth and learning. And this in turn can lead to motivation within the teams. So if they recognize that these setbacks or failures are opportunities for growth, they guide their team in a way that doesn't make them feel, rejected or demoralized when things don't go so well. They use it as an opportunity to say, guys, this happened, this sucks. We're going to learn from this. How can we do better? And they keep continually improving their staff that way. They invest time, energy into making their staff better because they understand that the power is in the people and that your team is only as strong as your players provide. And so there is an investment in ensuring that the employees are okay and that they are continually motivated. An emotionally intelligent boss has empathy, and I'll say compassionate empathy, which is the ability to recognize the emotions of your employees, knowing that, Sue doesn't look like she's doing so well. Let me check in with her. And they have the ability to listen to those problems, understand where the employee is coming from with compassion, because they can apply their skills in putting themselves in that other person's, seeing things from their perspective, and they can better solve problems and keep morale higher. A happy employee, an employee that feels heard and understood, is a motivated employee. And you probably have recognized this because we are much more likely to work hard for a boss that we know has our back than we are with bosses that are just tyrants that tell us what to do and barely notice when we're unhappy and don't care. And so all of these things lead to, employees, leaders that provide vision, and employees that want to drive to those goals, drive to the vision of the, whatever their leadership team has set up for them. They drive to that. They're motivated to do that, and they feel seen and understood, which drives them to working harder without feeling bad about it, wanting to work harder. So they're actually happier employees. So this is a circle of ensuring that the organization thrives, the department thrives, the leaders are happier people because they themselves are not only self-motivated, but they're motivating other people. They're driving to goals, so things are getting done, which gives a positive environment lacking toxicity. In fact, an emotionally intelligent person does not, allow toxicity in their environments. They know how to neutralize and extinguish toxicity within work environments, whether by educating their employees or keeping themselves in check and keeping their own emotions in check to ensure that they're not flying off the handle just because somebody upset them. And they're addressing things in a more efficient way because they understand what the emotion is trying to tell them, and they find solutions that actually produce results. So in the work environment, you can see that emotional intelligence and knowing what exactly you are providing within a work environment, not only as an employee, but even as a leader, if you happen to be a leader, these things are 100% valuable and high performing within an organization, but also internally, they produce happiness and they produce satisfaction and they drive everyone to work harder, to be a better team player, to drive toward goals. So you can see how emotional intelligence can play a very important role in a work environment. How does it play in your personal life? Okay, let's say that if you know that developing emotional intelligence can actually make you a better listener, an emotionally intelligent person's a really good listener. If you have an emotionally intelligent partner, they're also willing and prioritizing knowing, and getting along with the people that matter most to you. That's how it manifests itself in partners. They are honest and they are authentic and they appreciate that. They expect it in other people and they give it themselves. They're not afraid to argue. An emotionally intelligent person does not walk away from a debate. But what they do is when they argue with integrity. They think before they act. They think before they speak. Because they're active listeners, and they also take a moment to make sure that the message that they're trying to convey is going to be interpreted the right way. And if it isn't, they self-correct. An emotionally intelligent partner also is not impulsive. This is a drama-free person that doesn't just fly off the handle just because they're feeling a certain way. They take a moment to consider not only how they're feeling, but how what they're about to say may impact the other person. So it's the difference between having a partner that comes home after a bad day snapping at you, or a partner that's just had a bad day letting you know, listen, I've had a bad day. Is it okay if I just take a minute to sit on my own? I need to sort of process my emotions now. That's the difference. An emotionally intelligent partner really knows themselves really well. They know their setbacks. They know where they can fall short, and they take accountability for that. They don't run away from the responsibility that comes along with some of their shortcomings. They own it. They own it. And so all of these things lead to if this is what an emotionally intelligent partner is, pretty much all the opposites hold true for the emotionally unintelligent partners. And it doesn't necessarily mean that your partner is not a good partner just because they lack that maturity. It just means that there are some things that become bigger challenges when you're not as developed in emotional intelligence as somebody who is. So it doesn't at all mean you can't deal with it. It just means that you may need to approach things a little differently when someone is not at that same level. Part of the social skills aspect of this concept is that you are taking not only into consideration how you feel, the message that you want to portray, but you've got to sort of talk at the level of the person on the other side of the table. You can't just have a conversation where you are. You have to meet them where they are. And that is a skill. That is not something that is easily found in people. If you stop to think about it, what you have to do for a child when you have to sort of talk at where they are emotionally, at where they are intellectually, where they are maturity-wise, you must do the same for everyone else. And so that's sort of the general concept of social skill development within the emotionally intelligent world. Imagine what it would look like if everybody was emotionally intelligent, that everyone became a good listener, if everyone considered what other people are going through before they speak or act, if they took accountability for their own mistakes, if they were more able to communicate, properly and act to solve the root causes of problems, if they were better able to manage their own emotions in a way that allows the emotions to exist, gives them permission to exist, processing them in a way that is healthy, and then taking the lessons forward while leaving the stories or the feelings that they form behind. The world would be so beautiful. So while I actually just mentioned, feelings, and I think that it's important to distinguish between feelings and emotions, because that distinction is very important. In fact, it's critical in this. An emotion is a physiological response that your body produces in response to an event or a trigger. So something happens and your brain, it takes a quarter of a second for your brain to identify the trigger, and another quarter of a second for your body to produce the chemicals and release them to the rest of your body to produce physiological, signals in your body. Things like pounding heart, sweaty palms, heat, feeling the heat in your face. Whatever it is that emotion is, those physiological signals are then interpreted by you. The interpretation matters when it comes to emotions, because it doesn't just come from, everybody having the exact same emotion for the exact same situations. That is not the case. And the perfect example of that is, consider a roller coaster ride, where if you are sort of a daredevil kind of person, getting on a roller coaster and riding up that ramp can be exhilarating and exciting, feelings of joy, right? Those are pleasant emotions. If, however, you are not so much a daredevil and you ride on that roller coaster ride and you're on the way up, you may be absolutely terrified, and you register that feeling as something less pleasant, like fear. And so the same exact situation experienced by two completely different people could have polar opposite emotional responses. So interpretations really do matter when it comes to emotional intelligence, and understanding that actually can happen with people is important. Another example of that exact thing is, let's say that you were born and raised around dogs, okay, and you like them. You've had positive experiences with them, and you're visiting your friend at their house and they have a dog. The minute that you see the dog, you may see that as a pleasant experience, and you'll have, nothing but joy as an emotion in response to recognizing that you have a little puppy, and you can be very happy. But if you were raised with a bad experience with dogs and maybe something scary happened to you, you may actually register the event of seeing your friend's dog at their house as something unpleasant, and you might be feeling fear. And so again, the interpretation of the emotions can be completely different for two different people. We do tend to bring our background, our past experiences to the table when we register whether or not an emotion is pleasant or unpleasant. So per the Lazarus theory, there are emotion theories, and I'm not going to get into every single one of them because I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible, but the Lazarus theory actually considers us appraising, giving it a thought before the emotion is identified. So you have your event that happens, and then you label it, and lastly, the physiological and emotion happen at the same time. So that's the third step. And so per that theory, the cognitive appraisal that you do when you have that experience or when you have a trigger, that is very important. Your assessment of the situation or your appraisal of that situation actually tells you whether or not this is going to be a good or a bad experience. But emotions are not meant to last for more than 1 hour. Okay, the emotion itself is virtually a signal. You can see that as data that your body produces in response to an event or a trigger. The emotion can get processed. Feelings, however, those can persist for a longer period of time, and they can even persist for a lifetime. A feeling is actually our mind's awareness of the emotion or the event. And we create or conclude, we give ourselves a story about what happened. An example of that will be if you have an interaction with your partner. And so in this situation, your partner calls and says they're going to be late for dinner, or they're not going to make it. I have to work late. I'm not going to make it on time for dinner. So go ahead and start without me. The emotion starts, it's involuntary. It happens immediately. Our heart may start to pound. Our body is trying to tell us something. It's a signal that something's going on. Something needs our attention or, needs action. And so the way that we interpret the emotion, the way that we see that is it fear? Our heart pounding, we have some sort of reaction. We interpret the emotion as positive or negative. If you're having a negative emotion, you can start to build a story around this. So we can tell ourselves, if this is the very first time that your partner does it, they never do this, and you understand that there's a deadline at work, your emotional response or your emotional reaction to that could be something more along the lines of, indifference, maybe disappointment, a little sad that you're going to have dinner alone because you made a really good dinner and you were really expecting your partner to be there. So you say, oh, okay, I'll see you later, honey. Good luck with work. Call me when you're on your way home. Right? That's one way to interpret that emotion. So that's one person's experience. The story I told myself in that situation is my partner just had to work late. They have a deadline. I know that I totally trust them. Not a big deal. Yes? And then you have another person's perspective or interpretation of that emotion. So now your spouse calls, you say, I'm not going to be home on time. I have this thing, blah, blah, blah. They're working late. You could potentially interpret that by saying that it's a negative feeling. And you build the story by saying, okay, my partner just called. They were expected to come home. Why did they call at this time? If they've done this before, I don't know that I trust them. I'm starting to think that maybe he's having something going on at the office. And you start to create this story in your head. It's not based on fact. It's based on your interpretation of what you do or don't know. And that is a story or a conclusion of the emotion. It's not the emotion itself. So that's an example of a story that we can tell ourselves that can lead to whether that's sadness, whether that's fear that they're going to leave me, anger, because I feel like, this was so overwhelming that now I'm angry that they're not showing up to dinner. I made a really good dinner and they don't respect me enough to show up. And so you can see that an emotionally intelligent person is going to know the difference between what they know, the fact that they can hold on to, the emotion was triggered. There's this versus the emotion, the feeling that I just created based on very little information and no solid fact that gives me the validation that this feeling is something that I should hold on to. They know the difference between the two, and they can process the emotion without letting the feeling play on loop. Because when we create feelings, what happens is that you're creating the story, and the story starts to produce, it triggers its own emotions. So you start thinking, oh my gosh, if there's another person, now it's sadness that they're betraying me, and also fear that they're going to leave me. And these overwhelming emotions can lead to anger. And so you're in a loop of the emotion triggered a story, the feeling. The feelings are triggering more emotions, and those emotions are triggering more stories, and on and on and on and on. And so you get stuck in these loops where the emotion becomes a feeling, and those feelings become overwhelming, and you start triggering more and more emotions. If the feeling persists for a long period of time, it turns into a mood. And in some cases, those moods can even turn into disorders. These stories that we keep telling ourselves can lead us to a perpetual mood, which can become something like, that manifests itself in things like anxiety or depression, because we're living in those stories over and over again. Developing your emotional intelligence helps you to understand the difference between the two and live only by the emotion, and understanding that the emotion is a signal that I need to pay attention to something learning from it. And yes, this does sound very logical because it is. It's understanding the emotion, understanding what lesson I need to take away from this. What do I know? What do I not know? Is there something I need to figure out? Do I need to ask more questions? Is there something that I could have done differently? And if so, what am I going to do moving forward about it? And you leave the past behind you. You unload the baggage of those feelings and you move forward with action or decisions. That's what emotional intelligence can do for you. And that applies to virtually every interpersonal relationship that you have in your life. You will identify toxicity. You'll identify which ones are healthy, healthy situations and healthy relationships. So you know which ones to nurture. You'll know which ones to take action on, and in some cases setting boundaries. And if that doesn't work, learning to let those relationships go, because you prioritize growth, you prioritize authenticity and honesty and integrity. So those are the different ways that emotional intelligence can actually change your life. And now let's go back to the very beginning where I said EQ, many experts believe that EQ is a better indicator of success than IQ, and happiness than IQ. Starting to make a little bit more sense now, right? Now, I don't want to lie and say that it doesn't require some form of, intelligence, because remember, emotional intelligence is still intelligence. But you don't need to be a really good mathematician to understand complex situations with people or emotions, or be able to identify things in people and understand that, hey, when I approached it this way, that didn't work. I'm not going to do that again. And learn from your mistakes and learn from the mistakes of others. Understanding how the way that you put yourself out there into the world impacts the people around you. You can actually get better and better at that with time by focusing on those 5 key elements of emotional intelligence, starting with self-awareness. And so I know I mentioned that I'm going to definitely be providing more information on those 5 elements. I've already produced the self-awareness one. So definitely look it up, look back at my channel and find it, because I think it's really important to start at the very beginning. Start with doing your introspective and internal work and learn the tools that it'll take to continually develop that, and make sure that you aren't just forgetting or losing that self-awareness, because it is something that needs to continually be practiced. You don't just set it and forget it, because we change with time. You are not going to be just today who you are today. If you begin to develop your EI, you will change and you will improve. You're going to continually evolve as a person. And so there are new things to be aware of in yourself that you may not have had so much before. So it's a really good thing, and it's powerful. It puts you in the driver's seat of your life. You don't have to be at the whim of other people in order to move on with your life and cope with change and cope with your own emotions. You'll learn how to self-soothe. You'll learn to mitigate some of the situations that in your past would have been, a loss of control. With this new skill, you can actually keep things neutralized, and you can de-escalate things simply by understanding. It'll make you a better friend. It clearly can make you a better partner. It makes you a better employee, and it makes you a better boss, and virtually every aspect, understanding how important it is. Now, as a parent, I want to talk about the parenting part of it. If you've ever wondered why we as a society are in a place where emotions have always been perceived to be ineffective or illogical or unimportant, embarrassing, shameful, if you wonder how we got there, look back to your childhood. Our society has done this. And I don't just mean American society because I'm in the US. It's actually all around the world. We, as parents, tend to tell our kids when they start to openly express emotions, we tend to make them in whatever way we choose to do it, we want them to stop. Because their emotions, their expression of emotions tends to be inappropriate or inconvenient or embarrassing. You know, if you're in a restaurant and your kid is having a fit about something, you tend to want them to just stop. The problem is that we are raising children who don't understand how to process their emotions. They're not learning how to cope with things like loss and sadness and anger. They're learning to suppress. And as they become adults, as we are adults, when they become adults, what do adults do? We tend to judge others on their expressions of emotions. And so we hold ourselves, to this standard of suppression in emotions and not really knowing how to cope with it. So anger and sadness and rejection and things that happen in life because they're part of life, we don't know how to deal with it. We are also judgmental when other people try to express their emotions because we see that as a sign of weakness. And we think they should be ashamed and they should probably go hide that emotion. In leadership, we don't want to see people be sad or, any of that because we see that as what? A sign of weakness. And I think boys had it a little bit worse than girls, even though girls are kind of considered drama queens. I mean, boys, they're sissies. We tell our boys, hey, big boys don't cry, the phrases as we get older, right? Don't act like a girl. Why are you acting like a girl? And so women are pretty much disrespected in the emotional way because they think that women that express emotions are weak. But at the end of the day, the emotion itself is not the enemy. What has us so uncomfortable is that the way that we express our emotions may not be the most effective way. But the emotion itself is not the enemy. The emotion is an indicator. It's a signal. And with emotional intelligence, you can learn to manage it. You can learn to not suppress it at all. You don't suppress emotions. What you do is process them. Allow yourself to feel it the right way and then take the lessons away from it and carry those lessons forward. And so rather than being reactionary, we're being responsive. So a partner or, in a romantic relationship, you don't want them to be void of emotions. Of course not. They're still fully capable of feeling all the things everyone can feel. But they're just more thoughtful about the way they approach their emotions. I hope that makes sense because I want to put the myth of emotions can be evil and they're a sign of weakness. No, they're not. It's just how you present it, right? You don't want to have a boss that flies off the handle the minute that you're late for a project. They go and scream at you and they shame you in front of your coworkers. You don't want a boss like that because that expression of emotion is demeaning and demoralizing. But if you had a boss that called you to their office and said, help me understand what happened, where you can explain yourself and it's done with dignity. That's a much better approach. So it does improve all aspects of your life. They may be upset that you didn't deliver the project. They're still upset that you didn't deliver the project on time, but the way that they talk to you and the way that they express their acknowledgement of this particular failure or, to execute the failure to deliver is important. It's important and it can mean the difference between you learning your lesson and just missing the point altogether. So that's what it does for you. Now, there are some things that I want to address before I wrap this up. There are two big challenges that I find with developing emotional intelligence. And this is where it gets a little hard for people to feel like they can move to the next step without first understanding this. You are responsible for your own feelings. Remember the definition of emotions versus feelings. The emotions are the physiological response that your body has to an event or a trigger. But the feeling is the story that we've concocted in our minds about that event or emotion. And they tend to be rooted in fantasy. They tend to be rooted in fears and things that you just, a lot of a lacking of information, and we just kind of conclude things without actually understanding it. One of the biggest things, the challenge that I was referring to, is that if you know that you are the one producing the story, you've got to accept the responsibility for those emotions, or those feelings, I'm sorry. You have to accept the responsibility of those feelings. You have to understand that and accept the fact that I am responsible for my feelings, not everyone else. We are very quick to blame others and play the role of victim on a regular basis because it's more comfortable to not be responsible for the things that have been done to us. I am not saying that the behavior of others is okay and that it's always your fault. But what I am saying is that when things do happen to you and people behave badly toward you, you do have control over what you do moving forward. You do have responsibility for understanding where the patterns are. If this is something that repeats itself in your life, you've got to do some introspective work. You've got to ask yourself, am I doing anything to contribute to this continually happening? Is there anything that I can do differently moving forward? I am not saying that you are always going to be free of situations that hurt you, because people are going to do hurtful things. People are going to behave badly, for sure. But you are in the driver's seat of choosing what you do with those situations. And that is power. That is control. That is a huge tool in knowing that my life is really, truly mine. And if a situation goes in a way that I didn't want it to go, and I don't want to accept it anymore, I don't have to. I have the skill to cope with it. I have the resilience, knowing that I will make it, I will be okay no matter how this ends up. And I know the difference between right and wrong. I know what works for me and what does not. And I won't allow things that don't, help me or fill my needs to continually be a part of my life. Because again, you're driven to keep moving forward, not backwards, not staying in toxic situations and relationships. And so the very first one, I know it's a tough one. It's a really big pill to swallow for a lot of people. It is always more comfortable to stay in victimhood. It really is. I've been there. I know exactly what I'm talking about. It is much easier to stay in bed and blame circumstance. And so it's a bigger challenge to just go, you know what? Yes, that happened. I accept that it happened. I accept that a lot of that was not up to me. I definitely didn't deserve to be treated that way, to have these things happen to me. But I do have the ability and the choice to make something of my future, to get out of that rut and to choose to go forward instead of living in my past. I don't have to live in my past. And an emotionally intelligent person knows that. They are not a product of their history. They are actually accumulation of wisdom that they've gathered through various experiences. And they take that wisdom to guide them continually moving forward. Being okay with the fact that I didn't know what I didn't know at that time. Forgiving yourself for knowing that, that I had to live through it in order for me to learn. And I'm learned. I'm moving forward. So the last challenge before I wrap this up is that it's time consuming. And this is what I mean by that. First, developing the skill takes time. Okay, you're going to have to do some work. You're going to have to face some hard truths about yourself, hard truths and techniques that you start to apply to interactions with other people on a regular basis, using and applying those principles as you continue to grow as a person. But know that doing the right thing isn't always the fastest path. What do I mean by that? If you're aware, because being emotionally intelligent, again, this is all rooted in the emotions and understanding them and using them to guide you, right? Using them as a tool to learn and grow and cope and, learn from situations. If you took these lessons to heart, you will recognize that oftentimes in these situations, when you register that the person on the other side is not receiving the message well, that their emotional state requires for you to have this conversation at a later time. You need to build the patience to know that and accept it and hold off on the conversation. Because you can't force someone to listen. You have to find ways to meet them in the middle. And if they're not in the right place at that time, you have to accept that. So not only are you going to take time to journal and be aware of your own, emotions and what lessons you're learning on a regular basis, because most of the decisions that you make are based on emotions. Emotions play a part. They actually guide you to making decisions. I feel like this is a better option than this. The feelings of things, it helps you pick a mate. It helps you, protect your offspring, bond with them and protect them. It helps you to make a choice between, something that is healthy for you and not so healthy. So it keeps you in, out of the danger zone. Emotions guide you in a million different ways every single day. And you have to know the difference between what is actually something I should be fearing and something that actually I feel uncomfortable, but there's really nothing to be afraid of because I'm still going to be okay. This is just a chance I need to take in order to succeed. So you have to be patient. It is time consuming to build your emotional intelligence. But as you build the skills, I have no doubt that you will become a more patient person. Not just with other people, because that's essential, but you're going to be more patient with yourself because self-compassion is part of it too. So anyway, that concludes my Emotional Intelligence 101 episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. I didn't want to overwhelm you with a lot of details and data, information, etc. I just wanted to explain what in the world it is, because a lot of people throw that phrase around and don't really know where it comes from. So I hope that you enjoyed it. If you enjoy the content that I'm producing, definitely make sure that you subscribe and like my episode. And until next time, be kind to yourself. I will see you soon.